This is Greg Pass with the Americans in Wartime Experience. Today's date is December the 6th, 2022. I am in Woodbridge, Virginia. I have the pleasure to sit down with Jerry Domask. Am I saying that right, Jerry?
Correct. That's great.
Outstanding. And Jerry is in sunny
Jacksonville,
Florida.
Florida.
Jerry, can you tell us your full name and where you were born?
Jerome Harold Domask. I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
And do you have any military veterans in your family?
I am the first,
Are you really?
and totally by accident.
How's that?
I went to the University of Wisconsin Milwaukee campus, land grant school, and reserve officer training was mandatory for the first 2 years.
Huh.
The only reason I went the last 2 years is I got $30 a month. And in those days, it was huge. I paid
Yeah.
for everything. I graduated without owing a cent. Tuition when I started was $75 a semester. When
Wow.
I graduated, it was 125. And I worked. It was great. I had no intentions of staying in the military uh, till I got overseas. I
So
was a commander was relieved, and I was given responsibility as a first lieutenant.
So this was like an ROTC program, and were you commissioned right out of the gate, or
Correct. Yes.
okay?
Yeah, I graduated commission, but the last 2 years I did it for $30 a month. Absolutely no question about it.
Mhm. Okay, so how does that work? So when you go through ROTC, that's like the basic type training, and then what point are you selected for an MLS?
You apply, I think it's in your senior year. You put down three choices, maybe five. And the military basically decides, I think, where they need people. I ended up in ordnance with this logistics. And in those days, it was crazy. I went through basic ordnance class. I went through a supply class. Then I went to jump school in Fort Benning, followed by special forces training in Fort Bragg. And I was assigned to the 10th Special uh, Forces in Bad Toast, Germany. And 2 weeks before graduation, there was a Cuban Missile Crisis, and they filled all those slots in 24 hours. And that kind of is a reflection of my total career. It went left and right, up and down, and I loved every minute of it. I spent 6 years overseas, 4 in Germany, 1 in Vietnam, 1 in Korea, always kind of in the middle of things.
So let's go back a little bit. What year were you commissioned? What year would that have been?
1962, I believe it was May.
In May. Okay, and so keep in mind that a lot of people watching this might have never served in the military. What exactly is ordnance? What does that MLS entail? What's the kind of training that goes into that?
Logistics, there's all specialties. I was in maintenance, supply. I was in program management, logistics. As I went through, I have a master's degree from Florida Tech in procurement, which is 80% management, 20% legal. My last job in active duty, I was Detroit Arsenal tank plant commander. In Detroit, we were building the M68-3. And while I was there, we facilitized and started production on the Abrams M1. I was in the Department of Defense, managing Department of Defense contracts for a 5-state area. I had so many different experiences. I would go out and check a contractor that was having problems producing. I'd go out with a team. Invaluable experience, from missiles to trains to ball bearings to endless machine shops, you name it, it was there. And that was all kind of building up for getting into the tank business. It just was unbelievable, the experiences I had. Uh,
So after your training, you said your first assignment was Germany. Did I hear that right?
Correct. I was there a year. I came back. My wife graduated from nursing school, got her boards. We went back for 3 years.
Where at in Germany?
We were in Hannah, 20 clicks or so southeast of Frankfurt. Our first child was born in the 97th General Hospital, Frankfurt, Germany.
Did you enjoy that assignment? I've heard good things about Germany.
It was a great experience, probably the best training I had for Vietnam. I went through 54 readiness tests, meaning you've got to get all your troops, whether they're in the billets or living on the economy, ready and move out of your concern to a point in 2 hours. And they're all random. They're all at night.
Yeah.
And it was a great experience. I mean, you talk about being ready to fold the gap. We were still afraid the Russians were coming through the fold the gap. I mean, that was everything. Evacuation of the dependents and stuff. It was a real mission. That's what I enjoyed.
What so yeah, that's interesting. Let's explore that a little bit more. So the 1960s, a lot of younger people don't quite understand how potentially dangerous the Cold War really was. What was the United States' footprint in Europe at that time?
Well, Berlin was still controlled. Um, East Berlin was locked up. I remember going on the troop train from Frankfurt to Berlin. I could not enter the East sector because of my clearances. And invariably, we'd get stopped by the Russians. And that everybody knew they wanted Playboy, copies of Playboy and Levi jeans. And that was it. My wife went to the East, but that was real. I mean, we were at the checkpoint Charlie. I have part of the wall that was there. I mean, it was real, no
Yeah.
question about it. And we got a sense of what this world is about as a young kid.
Were,
It
were
was,
you were you attached to a division at this time or an independent unit?
no, I was in a brigade. Uh, Basically, I was at a company level when I got there, but it was ordnance. We did all kinds of things. We fixed M280s. They had a nuclear warhead. We had, you name the equipment, we had it, we fixed it.
Mm-hmm.
We did salvation of it, collection classification. If it wasn't economically repair, get rid of it. And we dealt with the armor divisions. We provided support on the turnpikes uh, for convoys going all over. So we were out there with the troops. We understood. We supported them. And it was a real mission. In most cases, you had all these training organizations back in the States, running through drills. And it was just, to me, it was boring as hell. I did not want to do that. And that's why I stayed in. We always changed, I loved it. I thrived on it. I didn't know why, but I did. After a month, after 6 months, you kind of knew what was going on. After a year, you got it pat and you go on. And in the military, the opportunities are there. And if you don't like your boss or he doesn't like you, hell, it's going to change in 6 months to a year. You can go through anything. Great
Yeah.
experience.
So you mentioned it was in a company tour, so your wife was with you. Did your wife enjoy the time overseas?
Oh yeah, we lived on the economy, and I met my wife at Bremerhaven. All these sirens are going off, and she didn't know the language. I'd been there a year, and on the economy, we lived above a German couple. We were there when President Kennedy was assassinated, and the landlady came up with tears in her eyes, saying, "Your president has been killed." And I feel this. Half the homes in Kyle, Germany, 3,000 people had candles burning in their windows. I mean, it was, and we also joined, we were invited by their married son to join a German motor club. And there was maybe 3 American couples. We'd go out to Flushing. We became part of their culture. It was fabulous. We
Mhm.
traveled all over. We traveled Europe in a with a Volkswagen I bought over there, about 30 gallons of gas in a 5-gallon can, sea rations, and a shelter hat. It was Frommer's $5 a day in Europe, and it worked. We stayed in a convent a half a block from the Sistine Chapel.
Cool.
And my wife communicated with a nun in Spanish. That was the common language. They had beds anchored in opposite sides of the room, and they apologized for it.
Uh,
Here we have a sterno stove heating our sea rations for breakfast. I mean, it was fabulous. We traveled all over. I mean, we traveled over most of Western Europe when we were there, and we lived, with the people. It was fabulous.
and
And we got fluent. We could get along in German after we were there. That type of thing.
you were there twice. Is that what I heard?
No, I was there for a year, came back, got married, and we stayed another 3 years.
Okay.
I was
Gotcha.
there 4 years total.
Okay. So the first Germany deployment, then where did you go?
Well, then I was assigned to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I had no idea why, and I ended up in a Pershing missile battalion in charge of all their maintenance. And with the experience I had in Europe, it was a no-brainer. I know what to do. The equipment's all the same. And
What
I was
rank
there
are you at this
probably
point?
4 months, and a commander was relieved of the 17th Special Ordnance Company. They were responsible for nuclear weapons, 12 different systems. They had 240 people. This is company size. It was a major slot. I was a captain at the time. The commander was relieved, and they were on 24-hour notice to be deployed any place in the world. And I jumped at it, part ignorance and part, if they're all screwed up, and anything you do right, it's got to be better than they had. And I was there close to 2 years. We got Strack. I mean, we were up and running probably in 6 months. And again, it was fabulous. And this was a combat post, which was great. I had a platoon of infantry, Vietnam Vets for Security. We had TS to get into our organization. The only way they could get in, and I had to give permission, is to the commanding officer of Fort Sill.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And in those days, this is interesting. We were working 5.5 days a week. And that meant at least 10 hours per day, 6 hours on Saturday. And in those days, the Army said, if we wanted you to have a wife, we would issue you one. If you were out in the field with your troops and your wife was giving birth, you stayed with your troops. And that was reality. My father-in-law died when we were there. My wife went by herself. I mean, that was reality. It was tough, really tough for the defendants.
Mm-hmm.
It's changed now, thank God. With doing away with the draft.
So after Fort Sill, where were you off to?
Uh, went to language school for Vietnamese. Went for 3 months language school, and again, this was I was on orders there. In fact, I was on orders for two hardship tours, and I volunteered for Vietnam. I was a regular Army officer by then, and I was there to defend the country. And the hardest thing I did was, I don't have an aptitude for language. And we had to memorize 40 to 45 words per day
Mm.
and then use them the next day. And I had a tape recorder. Number two, I wasn't authorized to take my family because TDY had to be 6 months or more before the military would pay. And here I am heading for Vietnam. Obviously, I took my family. At that time, my daughter was 2.5 years old. And when I left, our daughter was almost 3, and my wife was 8 months pregnant. And again, those are the conditions that people don't understand.
Yeah.
You're not even paid, to bring your dependents. I mean, crazy. The hardest thing I did is pass. I passed, but it was sheer guts.
So when that's a 3 month school, that's not that long. I mean, how efficient are you at speaking Vietnamese after 3 months? Are you pretty good at it?
I could get by.
Yeah.
I could get by. In fact, they had a year school of languages, and that was filled up. So we went to El Paso, Texas. In fact, our Vietnamese teachers, they went on strike while we were there. I mean, that's part of it. And we had the people in the year class fill in for a week or two. Well, they settled things. But that's life. You got to, you got to be ready to change and adapt. You got to be flexible.
So how much after the language school? How long did you have with your family before you deployed?
I went immediately.
So what year would this have been?
1967 December.
Okay.
I left, and my family, I said goodbye to them. My wife ended up going to Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. Uh, her uh, her mother lost her husband within that year. Wisconsin, 36,000. They said, "Why did you let Jerry go to Vietnam?" And that's when the anti uh, social unrest, cultural unrest was taking place. Uh, much of that time we were overseas, but you could see it. I mean, coming back, I was spit upon. I mean, it's all real, and that went on for years and years
Mm-hmm.
and years and years.
So let's talk a little bit about what was going on in Vietnam, like the global picture. What was going on in Vietnam in 1967 upon your deployment? How invested was the United States at this point? I don't need exact number of troops and all
No,
that.
no, no, I got you. It's a good question because there weren't big operations. General Westmoreland, quote unquote, we're winning the war, the body count, and all that bullshit. I arrived at Benoit. It was probably 2 a.m. in the morning, and all hell was breaking loose. Incoming rockets, outgoing rockets, artillery, automatic fire. And I said, damn, people can die here. That's when it sunk in.
Mm-hmm.
Still, there was a normalcy. I spent maybe 2 or 3 days. They sort out when you get there where you're going to go. And I ended up advising their chief of ordnance. I was part of MACV. I was an advisor. And we were a half mile from the An Quang Pagoda. We're doing Tet Offensive. The North Vietnamese set up their command post. We were 2 miles from their racetrack, where they marshaled their troops. My specific responsibilities, I did the programming for all their ordnance equipment. We had no computers. we had spreadsheets. I developed spreadsheets. Attrition rates. What's the size of gas mask for Vietnamese?
Mm-hmm.
I got my counterparts to measure a battalion to get the average sizes. We had 65 different forklifts in country. You can't support it supply wise. We had tanks, automatic or armored personnel carriers, you name it. I had a couple of classified programs. And one of the majors in our division said, Domask, don't screw it up. Be careful what you submit for approval because it's not going to be checked. And that was fact. Probably the best advice I ever got. The person I replaced was living on the economy, and he communicated with the family in French. And I was saying, this is ridiculous. We're in a war zone, Why in the hell would I do that? And I was assigned to I call it a Outflyers. It was a BOQ, but it was an old French hotel, which had lost power most of the time. there were really no amenities. I had a Korean roommate for a while. I had military intelligence guys coming and going. We had no infrastructure of a military unit. We had nobody in charge overall. Uh, Tet hit. All hell broke loose. January 31st. In the first month, there were 12,000 civilians killed in Cholan, the Chinese section. There were 2 million refugees. This went on in Cholan district for 4 months. And that history has really not captured. I did a series of paintings. I have an undergraduate degree in painting and sculpture. And I went back here in '09 and I have another 46 credits in art and design. And by accident, I did a war series, and it's called Reflections, the Vietnam War 45 years ago. And I would say maybe 6 or 7 are realistic. It identifies the destruction of population and property. Our mess hall was wiped out. I ended up eating on the economy for 2-3 months. I'm not sure how long. We had nothing there. And I took photographs. You could look out a half a mile to a mile, and nothing was standing over knee high. It reminds me of Ukraine. The difference in Ukraine, though, they have a lot of concrete structures. They were minimum in Vietnam. They had shacks, many of them. There were some. And that said, wow. And I remember the South Vietnamese aircraft would be strafing overhead. The flares would be lighting up the whole area because the enemy moved that night. You would have Puff the Magic Dragon, 50,000 rounds per minute. And that's why the high death rate. And, they didn't know who the hell they were firing. They were firing at anything moving. And it's interesting. We knew the Vietnamese, well, the first big surprise, we were not issued weapons, nothing as advisors. That's the arrogance and ignorance of the powers to be, both the senior in country and back in the United States. I had a Vietnamese driver assigned. Once Tet hit, I never saw him again, and I understand why. He had family there, I'm sure. We scrounged Thompson submachine guns. And again, this is through the advisor network. My roommate was in collection and classification. These were found weapons. They worked, and we could get ammunition. I had another roommate transit again. I took him to the airport when he went home in Econoline, and I kept his vehicle. And that was the first of many surprises. I remember when Tet hit. I mean, it was just total chaos. We knew the Vietnamese wouldn't be there. We just knew that. And we had a Jeep configured. I drove. My roommate was shotgun on the right side, and we had 2 seats facing backwards. We all had Thompson's submachine guns. And we knew the routes by that time. And that city of millions of people was dead silence. There wasn't anything moving. No dogs, cats, rats, nothing. And we tore through that city at 60 miles an hour. And we were ready, and we knew we had to be there. And we arrived safely. And we didn't see the Vietnamese for maybe a week or 2 after. Their families were there. I do recall at Christmas time, I was Santa Claus to the Vietnamese kids in our compound. I had a suit on, stuffed me with pillows, and I had a pillowcase full of oranges and apples. And these kids would come up and they would get one like it was the crown jewel, and they would give it to their parents. I mean, these are some of the warmth you felt, and the cultures worldwide are the same way. You know, we are spoiled rotten in the U.S., believe me.
Oh yeah.
But we also we had the monsoons, and we had tin roofs over a cement slab, and the water would come in, and the rats would come in. The rats were that big. We used to have sharpened broom handles like spears. I remember I hit one right in the side and rolled over, got up and ran away. But that was life. In fact, what was interesting, after 2 weeks of constant bombing, constant missiles coming in, that became the norm. That was the norm. The only thing that would wake us up at night myself were the incoming missiles, and you could hear them. I'd sit up in bed and go, boom, I go back to sleep. And that went on for close to 4 months. I ate on the economy, and language is important. Our hotel was condemned, and I had the option of staying there, and I did because I knew the lay of the land. I knew the restaurants. I didn't want to go to a new place where I had to start all over. The roads, everything. And it was a great decision for me. The hotel leaked like a sieve. We had buckets all over. Uh, I remember
How far was that hotel from your duty station?
probably, depending on traffic, 25 minutes or so. I mean, traffic, when things picked up again, there were millions of people all over the place. I mean, it's just, we were there when the chief of police shot the spy.
Yeah.
That person ended up in in Washington D.C. and Burke, Virginia, running a restaurant.
Yeah. I read an
And
article about that. That's right up the road from me.
all right, we lived right off Old King Mill Road,
Oh yeah.
and I tell you, he had every right to do it. I mean,
Hmm.
if you get the details, I still stay in touch with that stuff. Uh,
So just so I'm clear, was this was in Saigon where you were?
it was Saigon in Cholan district, which was the Chinese district.
Okay.
There were a lot of Buddhists. The regime was Catholic, and the Catholics were not kind to the Buddhists. And that's why they set up their command post in the An Quang Pagoda, half a mile from where we were. The racetrack was 2 miles. They had a large space where they could marshal their people. Westmoreland was caught with his pants down, period. There's absolutely no question in my mind. I believed it then, and the more I read, the more I believed it. He was an old school general, spit and polish. And I know people that guy's got two Purple Hearts, one in the army, he was at the Battle of Way, another Purple Heart. He was dressing him down because he didn't shine his boots. I mean, just stupidity.
Hmm.
General Westmoreland Abrams was his deputy. He took over. He was fabulous. He understood the troops. He was with the troops. They changed the tactics and stuff. And I say this period of time was arrogance and ignorance of all the senior leadership, both CIA, many of the senior military, and definitely the politicians. Uh, it was absurd. How many people can we count? How many body counts? And you had helicopters stacked about helicopter. Do this, do that. It was total chaos. Uh, I was also, and I have more input to my knowledge because I was a student at the Command and General Staff College, and we had all branches of service, plus 15% were allies. Also, I was on the faculty there for 2 years. Chaplains were there, doctors were there, guys in the trench that had to go back to being combat to get their high. I mean, that was real also. I've seen it all. And what I didn't experience, I absorbed from my relationships. I remember a full colonel, military police, bright guy, played the guitar, could sing. I remember one day he came over to my house. He was beside himself, and I was just holding on to him. And talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. Um, when I was in the Pentagon, I was given responsibility. I was in charge of professional development for Army majors worldwide, maybe 12,000. My counterpart that had assignments was Hugh Shelton. He ended up being the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, 4 stars, 2 terms under Clinton. You know, we knew what was going on. Well, I was given responsibility to help Army Major Theodore Gastis acclimate back into the Army. He was a POW 5+ years, 4.5 spent in solitary confinement in a footprint approximately 5 by 8 feet. Ted and I are foxhole buddies. We've been together still for almost a half century. I got back into my art, and this is important. In 2009, I started my series on the Vietnam War. I did not go there purposely. I've had post-traumatic stress disorder. When I was 7 years in retirement, things weren't going. I didn't have my confidence. I didn't have my push. And I went to counseling. And the counselor was also a hypnotherapist. And I remember playing the rotary of a Huey helicopter blade. And I said to myself, shit, that's not me, you know? And after 3 sessions, he says, go, do your thing. Well, I didn't realize I got back. It helped a lot. I had blessings beyond all beliefs. But it got me into art, and it got me into the positive aspects of art for healing. And that released me. And I've dedicated much of my life since then to the healing of veterans. I've curated 2 national veteran art exhibits, one called Invisible Becoming Visible, with hope in healing. The other one was Then and Now. The first one was, it was sponsored by the University of North Florida, where I took my credits. And then more recently, the St. Augustine Art Association had another one. And St. Augustine had veterans from Vietnam and the Middle East, all sectors. We had 3 women in it. And this freed me and allowed me to do it. And I still work with a number of veterans. I call them my foxhole buddies in the power of art for healing. This is this is happy, but so powerful. I got an email yesterday from one of them, a female, and I've been dealing with her for 15 years. When I looked for artists, I looked for what they're doing art-wise. And I don't want to mention her name, but she has finally got hold of herself. She was raped at 17 years old in boot camp. She's a Vietnam era veteran. Power of art is absolutely invaluable to some people. I was so happy for her. And I got to keep touch with these people. I feel almost I can sense it. One of the things that happened to me when I was going to college, I worked at a private mental institution for maybe 3 years, 2 years. At the last, I was full-time second shift, and I had night second shift when I didn't have night classes. And it all worked out. I mean, it was fabulous. And it was a lesson in life for me, the reality of life. We had a psychiatrist there. We didn't even have a psychiatrist on staff. We had teenage kids, 16 years old, swallowing razor blades, And that's kind of part of life. But The woman I was talking about, she found direction. I mean, that talk about a Christmas gift.
Mhm.
That was great. That's part of what I do, and I do it because I'm lucky. The older I get, the more I realize I shouldn't be just being in Vietnam, and life has been blessed thereafter. Um, I've been married 59 years, 3 children. They're all great people. 5 grandchildren, the same way. My daughter just had a wedding, her second one, and both families melted transparently like we had known each other forever. I mean, that's a blessing. I mean, it's hard to find a family where they can get together and they don't have fights. That's why I say these blessings, they just keep coming.
Mhm.
I consulted for PricewaterhouseCoopers for 5 years. I had my own business, which was highly successful consulting. It was to the Department of Defense and stuff. Um, there's no reason for it. I'm just blessed. That's all I can say. And I mentioned I'm going to the World Triathlon Championships for the Olympic distance. I started when I was 65. I started running in the Pentagon when I was 38. January 10th, I'll start my 46th year of running. Why? It's a blessing. Um, that's why I
Doing
had to
something
do.
right.
Pardon?
You're doing something right.
The Lord's looking after me.
Amen.
Yeah, no question.
Let's jump back to Vietnam. You mentioned that when you got there, it was an eye opener. How did you get there? Was military plane? How'd you get to Vietnam?
Yeah, I went over with the military transportation. Yeah.
And what was your first impression when you got off the plane?
Well, it was landing. I said, this is for real. You can die. Uh, but until Tet, it wasn't that obvious. Tet, the whole country was in an uproar.
Yeah.
I mean, you name it, wherever you went. I went back to Vietnam maybe 6 years ago, and the paintings released me. I took my wife. We were in Ha Long Bay. That's east of Hanoi. This is Tonkin Bay. They attacked us while we bombed North Vietnam. I was in Hue, and I went there. I didn't realize till I got there for myself. And Ted Goss is the former POW. He was captured there. He was a senior military intelligence officer they had as a prisoner. He did not go to the Hanoi Hilton till the last 6 months, and they wanted to freshen him up before his release. And all we hear about it really is Hanoi Hilton. They had other people. Ted was crazy when he got back. I call him Mother Teresa incarnated. He is an incredible individual. He is brilliant. He's a poet. He's an artist, and he doesn't have a mean ounce of animosity anyplace. It's just incredible. Loves opera. It's just, he's a role model. He has probably done more for me than I've ever done for him. And we've had this conversation. We kind of feed off of each other. He's my muse. Muse. It's these are the blessings that they're there. If one will embrace it, they're there. You know, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're both right. It's up here. It's how you frame things. Um, Vietnam is you make do with what you have. Eating off the economy. That helped me to manipulate myself in the economy with people. I could get by. That I could do. And I knew the lay of the land when I was there. Otherwise, I don't know where I would have eaten and stuff. I probably wouldn't have lived there.
Jerry,
But it was
what
go
unit
ahead.
were you assigned to at this time?
Pardon?
What unit were you assigned
Oh,
to?
it was MACV headquarters. I would go up and brief him. I remember I'd go up there at midnight sometimes. There was a big crisis. And I had a budget. The first budget I submitted was $2 billion that I did for equipment. There was another billion that our ammunition people calculated, and then it was submitted as $3 billion. I went back to meet with the it was the AMC. They were the readiness people, the producers of all this equipment in Hawaii, to share with them what we needed, what we didn't need. In fact, I was scheduled, a meeting was done on a Friday. They said, well, we can delay you till Monday or Sunday. I said, I got to go back. I got to go back. You know, it's just that sense of urgency. You feel guilty about being out of country. You know, you got your people are there. But it was satisfying that you could do something positive with the means available under those conditions. People would have no idea. You know, I had similar circumstances when I was in Korea. I was in a combined army. We had 3 or 4 Korean corps. I dealt with their general. In fact, I would help him get manuals and stuff from the proper sources here. In fact, he visited the United States and he had dinner at my house after we got back. And I took him through the tank plant stuff. And, you know, we're so blessed here with what we have. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just incredible what we have.
Jerry, when you were in Vietnam, how did you communicate with your family?
Oh, tape recorder. I told you my wife was 8 months pregnant when I left. I was never informed of such by the Red Cross or whoever. We had boat mail, and that's how I got informed.
Had what?
Boat mail, letters go across on a boat.
Boat mail.
It probably went to the Philippines or something.
Yeah.
But I got a letter. And I would try to write every day. I couldn't. I mean, it just was impossible. But the tapes would go back and forth. Nothing's happening. I would say nothing's happening. When I got home and listened to a couple of those tapes, you could hear the spent cartridges from the attacking aircraft bouncing off the tile roof. I would have been petrified had I known that. Absolutely petrified. There was no communication. It was all after the fact. Everything was after the fact. I couldn't influence anything at home with the family. Nothing. Mm-hmm. And that was probably one of the most difficult things. I had more control over my environment there as opposed to my wife in a town of 36,000. Fond du Lac, Wisconsin is still 36,000. They're 60 miles north of Milwaukee. That was the most difficult thing, really. Just the not being able to do anything, you know.
In the little amount of downtime that you had, what did you do to keep yourself entertained?
In Vietnam?
Yeah.
We had no time. I mean, we really, you know, probably the most enjoyable thing, we would play volleyball with the Vietnamese and get a keg of beer. But that Christmas time was great. You know, we would deal with the families and stuff, you know, family. And that really is what we did. I think I went to church maybe 3 times. We just didn't have, you know, and that was by the PX. You know, we had our piss pots on, you know, 3 or 4 of us say a little prayer, get to communion, and that was it. I mean, you know, we had nothing. We had no structure. Mm-hmm. We had nobody in charge of our billets in tent. We formed our own security. We had sand barrels. We'd fire our guns in there to make sure they were empty, but we had nobody in charge. We had no support. I don't know where the hell a mess hall came from, but there was nobody in charge. I'll tell you that. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was just like people coming and going. I had a roommate for a while. He was military intelligence. I'd see him every 2 or 3 months. I had a Korean roommate, and they would eat kimchi, pickled cabbage, and stink. They'd leave it in the refrigerator. You know, it just that's the way it was. You know, just you got to be flexible.
So tell me a little bit about your homecoming from Vietnam.
Oh, I came in at 2 a.m. in the morning, and there was nobody there to meet us. And I was going to Santa Barbara, actually, Goleta. My parents. And I guess I got a bus to go there. There was nobody to meet you. I guess they had us coming in at midnight because they didn't want the protesters there. And I was probably in shock. I was exhausted. And my mother said, "Aren't you going to call your wife?" I'll never, and it was a different world coming out of a combat zone. And people can never understand it. Everybody comes back different. And unless a person has been there, they'll never understand. I can establish rapport with veterans, even if they weren't in a hostile environment, because there's a lot of things they go through that a civilian will never understand. The changes, the absence from family, the demands on their time and stuff. It takes time to adjust. Oh my God, does it take time to adjust? I'm not sure. I was assigned then. See, that helped. After Vietnam, I was assigned to the career course at Aberdeen. So we had the family there. And I was a major then. I was supposed to be for captains, but everything was screwed up. I had a great wife. The kids were great. I mean, 59 years. Unbelievable. Same person. That's
Mhm.
what people say, the same person.
Tell me a little bit about your time in Korea.
Uh, Another experience. We were 20 minutes south of the DMZ by tank.
What year?
It was 76, 77. President Pak was assassinated. He was a dictator at that time. And we were in a combined army, Camp Red Cloud. And we didn't know who did it. The Koreans didn't know who did it. We didn't know where our counterparts, the Corps can be 150,000 or more for one corps, depending on how they put them together. And we didn't know if there was going to be an attack. In fact, we were locked down, and we had all the intelligence coming through there, and our counterparts. We didn't see them. We'd see them at the mess hall and stuff, and it was very tense. I would go to the DMZ even before that. I had a senior warrant officer. He was a senior warrant officer in the Army at that time. He was an ammunition expert, and I'd go up to the DMZ to check. And I'd been up there 3 or 4 times. And I had lunch with the commander up there. He was a lieutenant colonel from there, West Point. And I spent probably 95% of my time with the Korean people also. Our deputy was Colonel Kim, and we used to call him the Bing Crosby of Korea. We had a great rapport. I would go with him and the Koreans. We'd go climbing hills together, and they always wanted to take photographs because I stood above everybody. In fact, I ran in a 10K run, and it was Seoul University, and they relocated the university so the students couldn't run; they could control them. And they had the headlines in the sports section. Here I am, that high above everybody else. In fact, the photographer ended up coming to my house, and I was living in a cement block room, maybe 16 by 16 feet up there in the compound. Again, there were great experiences. I had a Korean lieutenant colonel, Korean major, and a couple of NCOs reporting to me. And the lieutenant colonel was promoted to battalion commander. and all his officers then give him chickens and stuff. That's the way they do things. And he asked me if we could cook them in the mess hall. They didn't have ovens. And we all met in my little block room. And it just so happened the news writer from taking the photograph in Seoul University, this 10 miler, he ended up there also. It was, it's integrating yourself with the population. I remember, God, this is something else. The, the major Korean invited all the full colonels, 2 busloads, to go visit the 2nd Division. They had no idea what they were doing. Fortunately, I had a battalion commander up there, and I called them on the last minute. And I said, "Can you accommodate it?" They did, and for touring of the division. On the way back, I offered to buy them a drink at the officers club where we were, and you would have think, I was God or something. I was teaching at Commanding General Staff College, and we had a Korean there. He was a lieutenant colonel or colonel. He made general when I was in Korea, and he gave me a present because they honor the elderly and teachers. And I lived with the Korean people, and and they didn't have dependents up there because we were in harm's way. We were so close to the DMZ. But when I went back, my wife came with me. We went through the tunnels, 35 meters dug out of granite. And you could see, unless you're there, you don't get a sense of that DMZ. And it was a great experience for her. We went to Cu tunnels in Vietnam. That was west of the city. We were in Hue. We were in Saigon. My guide in Saigon was born in Cholan. He was 5 years old, and he was there. It's kind of another gift. The people in South Vietnam, they still supported the Americans, and it was the economics and stuff. He knew where all the troops were. He knew where my old BOQ was. They changed names and stuff, but he showed me. He knew where the troops were. It's just, I'm glad I went back. I wouldn't have gone back had I not done the series of painting. It was healing. There's no way in hell I would have stepped there. I did a 50-page photo journal of my trips returned to the Far East. It included mainland China, all over. It just, it was invaluable, especially for my wife.
Mm-hmm.
I could share what went on, and she became part of it. I talked to a lot of groups. I talked to there was a course out here at UNF, David Cartwright, presidential instructor. He had a class called the 1960s in Vietnam. It wasn't mandatory. It was in a big hall. He would get 45 to 65 people there. And I had just finished my series about reflections of the Vietnam War. And he had to go on sabbatical and wanted me to take a class. And I said, I got to meet this guy. I remember being spit upon all that stuff. He was the real deal. I got his syllabus. He was a bright guy. And he wrote this in 1980, which the Vietnam War was still touch. It was burning hot. And I went in there with 6 of my paintings. And there was probably 50 people there, and I talked from the paintings. And the people, they don't teach Vietnam anymore. And it's really a disadvantage to our society and to our people and stuff. This is important. I gotta say this. And my paintings and reflections is my own personal experiences. The military would not show them because it's not their narrative per se. I had a chance to put him in the Hall of Warriors Hall in the Pentagon. Commanding General Staff College wanted to do something on him. I had a number of requests. I said, look at my paintings first. And they all went, my opinion is there are no good wars. And I start out my briefings that way. And I said, I'll summarize at the end. At the end, I'll say, There are four exceptions, in my opinion, to that statement. We were justified for the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and the two World Wars. The criteria being it's in our national interest. Number two, the people supported it. Number three, we had defined objectives for victory. And probably most important, we went to win. Korea, we didn't go. Vietnam, we didn't go. And in the Middle East, we didn't go. We lost bodies. And that's probably the heart of my convictions and my paintings and my experiences. If you don't go to win, it's not in our national interest, don't go. It's the destruction of people and population. We live 58,000 plus. And it's, in fact, I have a painting. It's called Suffering. Can you wait? I want to show you. Can I show you that painting? Yeah. Can you see that? It's right here.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's hard to see on this, but
okay, I can send you a copy later. I am a curator for the National Prisoner of War Missing in Action Memorial and Museum in Jacksonville, Florida. I designed an installation a year and a half ago. And it's a replica, it's 27 by 14 feet, honoring Major Gastas. I reproduced his cell, had it reproduced, so people could get an idea of what solitary confinement is like.
mm-hmm.
It addressed Ted as a prisoner of war. It addressed Vietnam, and then it addressed Ted's life afterwards. These are all on my website. It's just, if you're interested, but this here, it shows kind of the guts are missing. My dog tags, you can't read it, but there's a child. Ted and our wives were both 8 months pregnant. I saw my son when he was 11 months old. Ted didn't see his son till he was 7 years old. And these are all, it's the suffering of all the loved ones, of all the kids, of missed memories, missed opportunities. And we tend to forget this. It's the wives, it's the loved ones. In today's generation, it could be the man or the male or the female that's taking care of the family. We have a lot of veterans that are females. I had 3 of them in the last art show.
Hey, Jerry, let me ask you a couple questions as we wrap it up. So you're a career officer. You spent a lot of time in the military. If you had a young man or a young woman approach you and say they were thinking about being commissioned or even enlisted in the U.S. Army, what advice would you give them on how to be successful in the military?
I would say do it. It's a great experience. You will get more responsibilities as a young kid. I had 45 people. I was 22 years old. Listen to your warrant officers, listen to your sergeants, be able to delegate, be able to listen. You can learn so much. I have counseled my cousins and nephews. they were going through, just the testosterone at that level. Best thing that ever happened to them. I would say go for it. It's there. Do the best you can. Have integrity. Work together and never give up. It's the same thing I say. If you think you can, or you think you can't. You're both right. Never limit yourself. Never limit yourself. Accept challenges. It's amazing what can be accomplished. It's all up here. It's how you frame things. Be positive. Be positive. It comes back 1,000-fold. I would highly recommend it for anybody experience wise. It gave me the basis for my life, I think, and integrity. I saw more integrity in the military collectively than I've seen any place in private industry. And I worked in private industry for 40 years. I had some of the largest clients, the Fortune 50s and bigger. And I had the mom and pops, a couple million, that help disadvantaged businesses. I was in charge of incubators for small businesses, my career and stuff. It's great opportunity to learn. Invaluable.
All right, the last question. This one's a doozy. So obviously we're videotaping this interview right now, and in a couple of months, you're going to receive a flash drive, electronic version of it, and you'll be given instructions on how to submit your story to the Library of Congress for the Veterans History Project. Theoretically, your video will be stored at the Library of Congress for hundreds of years. If a couple hundred years from now, your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren stumble upon the video, what would you want them to know about your service to your country?
Oh, it was a great opportunity. I would do it again. And it was an honor, absolute honor. Where else do you get people willing to give their life? I didn't even think of that in those terms, and ask for nothing in return. It was a privilege. And it's our freedom. And I think in all our travels, what people desire most, regardless of where they are, and this includes a couple of trips to Russia and stuff, people want their individual freedom, raise their family, practice their own religion. They don't need it dictated from the top. That's probably it.
Well said. Well, on behalf of the Americans in Wartime Experience, I thank you for sitting down and having a talk with us today about your military career. And thank you for your service. I appreciate it.
God bless you, Greg. I think what you do is absolutely fantastic.